I really care about people. I don't care the industry. I just find there's an easier way with the proper support, as I was offered through coaches and mentors, to find a better path. Once I earned trust with the leader, we do start to talk about legacy. And it's one of those things, are you going to go or are you not going to go? Are you going to be the best you can be and own your space? Or are you going to play in the space for a couple of years and go back to something else? And it was really hard, Chris. I had lots of bumps, but we got to that size in year one. But there was a difference between having a concept of wanting to coach. And an old friend of ours used to say, there's more coaches coaching coaches than there are coaches doing great work.
Welcome to the Sinclair podcast, where we share real-world experiences, wisdom, and the honest struggles of entrepreneurs to help you navigate and scale your business with confidence. Matt, it's been, I don't know. I did my math. It was like 13 years, and you would argue that it's even a little bit longer, but we've known each other for a decade plus.
Absolutely. And I think not only is it a decade plus, but some of the, I'd say, the most critical years of my personal and entrepreneurial journey. So grateful to spend so much of that time with you and the group that we had. And it was important times. It set the path for where we are today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Entrepreneurs Organization, that form group, the core group, and there's so much evolution and change over the years. But the best part and the highlights for me were just the people like you that I got to sort of keep in life. And we can go a year sometimes without chatting, but I always follow. There's just that deep-rooted friendship and that time we spent together that I value so much, and it's been an absolute pleasure to watch your journey. So,
thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
So, give me a title for what do you call yourself? You're a coach, you're an author, you're a speaker. You do a lot of different things, but describe what you do.
I'd say this is something that's at flux right now. So about 9 years ago, I started to call myself a hospitality leadership coach. And the reason for that was I saw there was a lot of consultants in different spaces, and I saw an opportunity after going to a Tony Robbins week-long program to really niche down and own the coaching space. So I called myself a hospitality leadership coach. I made that up. I was really the only person in that space. But right now, I think we're going through another transition of how coaches identify themselves, or more importantly, how do we stand out to our ideal audience? Because what I'm seeing now is when you go to a networking event, it's cold, and you tell somebody you're a coach. To me, it feels like a decade ago when somebody said they're a consultant. People almost have reservations, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's a coach. There's no certification. So I think now, although I am a hospitality leadership coach, about 30% of my year is keynote speaking. I really am looking at what does the next chapter look like? How do I continue to identify myself for myself, so I know my space, and how do I identify myself so I'm easy to understand in the market? But I think for many of us, no matter where you are in the entrepreneurial space, it's, how can somebody easily find you and understand how you can support their need? And I think that's fluid, especially in today's times.
Yeah, absolutely. So take me back to, can you give us sort of a context of like the, background growing up for you, just to paint a little bit more picture of kind of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I got a chance to stand on a stage last week and share this story, and I share it with a smile because there were some lumps, but it led me to where I am today. As a young kid, I really struggled in the public school system. So based on a lot of noise and activity I had at home, challenges, I was put in learning strategies classes, and I failed grade 1 twice, and then I failed grade 3. So I don't know if that's ever happened before. But really, as I look back and reflect, I had a lot of energy that I didn't know how to output. And the teachers, although back then I wanted to blame teachers for not knowing how to teach me how to learn. But the reality was they weren't supported back then in how to manage a child who had as much going on for me. So I pushed my way through school, getting into high school. High school said I wouldn't graduate high school. So to go look for alternative employment, which meant find a trade job. And I got a little bit chippy, probably end of public school, definitely in high school, and started to want to prove others wrong. So I was able to make it through public school, actually graduated high school with honors, barely. And it was a fight. And I think it's because, I don't think it was because of the marks. I think the teacher saw the effort. So I think sometimes when you're put behind the 8 ball a little bit, people can see the effort and they start to rally behind you when the effort is positive. And then for myself, I went into college. Coming out of college, I got a couple great jobs one working for Bacardi. I was 18 years old when I started at Bacardi. They're a client. I told their HR department recently at their annual conference. They gave me a little bit of shit afterwards, but
Yeah,
all in good
no
fun.
doubt.
So Bacardi to Anheuser-Busch. And then I had a client who, I'm going to try to keep the story short, but was working with, he was one of the top restaurant groups north of Toronto. And he had a friend who was making the most successful restaurants in Australia more profitable, putting 100 grand of their bottom line in the first 12 months. So we brought that company to North America. About 5 years into that company, I realized it was an inventory company. Chris, I think I told you this in one of our past meetings. I don't like inventory. So I ended up owning an inventory company. But what I realized is I was coaching behavioral change. How do you get somebody inspired enough to do different to get what they want? Whether it's more profitable business, better inventory, or supporting their people. And when I did the soul searching, I realized what I love is supporting people inside our industry. Although my core is hospitality, and we might get into that a little bit more later, I really care about people. I don't care the industry. I just find there's an easier way with the proper support, as I was offered through coaches and mentors, to find a better path. And then since for the last 9 years, I've spent 3 to 4 days a week on a stage or in a room with a group of leaders, helping them create clarity, helping them communicate, and then most importantly, helping them execute.
Wow, incredible story, man. I'd actually forgotten a couple of those things along the way, so I appreciate you sharing. I want to go back to high school and even those early years where pretty much everyone is telling you can't and this isn't going to work. Are there one or two people in your life that stood out or that you remember that were sort of the people said like, "Hey, man, you can do this," or was that really self-led for you?
No, I wouldn't say it was self-led. I think the self-motivation was just force, where I didn't know to do different. So I think the choice was, the alternative was to lead a very unhappy life. So I chose to see the positive, and I was a very happy kid, although there was stuff, as there is for all kids. It wasn't me, it was every kid growing up in the high school system. But I remember I had this one teacher. My brother's 10 years older, my sister's 20 years older. She's actually been a teacher for all three of us. Her name was Miss Gibbs, and she led the learning strategies class, which in high school can be a bit dangerous. You go in those classes, it really is literally kids with significant learning disabilities, maybe 20% of the class, and a holding tank for the other 80%. And there's kids getting into drugs and trouble and fights. And she was just really honest. She said, "You have the ability to do what you choose to." And I still remember to this day, I couldn't hear her at the time, but my mom repeated it up until her passing. She said, "Matt, you're a silent leader." She said, "Although you're not out there yelling and fighting, the other kids will follow your lead." And I still remember Miss Gibbs to this day, for one of the first people, at the age of 14, that turned around and said that, "I believe in you and what's possible for you." So she'll always, I drove my daughter past the school a few weeks ago,
Oh man,
and
that's
told her Miss
awesome.
Gibbs, she's like, "I know Miss Gibbs." But I do think there's people who run our lives for a moment that can completely change the direction.
That's super powerful. I love that. So you really spent so many years in the hospitality space and working up and identified, you said about 5 years in, hey, I don't want to be in the inventory game, but then this became that conduit to, take your skills and really expand on like coaching and leading on a more formal level. Were there points along the way where you doubted what you were doing when you morphed to, this coaching business? Because really it's, you had experience, but you didn't in a way.
There's an exact moment, and these are great questions, Chris, because so I don't know why they're so visual for me when you're asking them. One of my goals in life was to attend a Tony Robbins program. So I attended Business Mastery in Florida. I show up a day
Love
early,
that guy.
and I walk in. I'm like first in line, and the event started. I'm like, what is happening? So anyways, I go in, and they actually messed up my dates. So although I was in the hotel, I didn't know the event started. So I get put in a day late, which is really hard to catch up at a Tony Robbins program.
This is what, like a couple thousand people? Like they're big events, right?
4,000 people. Yeah, there was 4,000 at that one. That's before he kind of shrank down and added virtual. But the room's full, and they've already spent 16 hours in a room, and it's fine to get over. It's just I was so overwhelmed with the experience. But then as I started on the first break asking everybody what they did, every single person that I talked to said that they were a coach. And that's when I say that's dramatic for effect, but that's how it really did feel. So I remember walking out into the hallway and calling my business partner at the time, calling my ex-wife, and saying, "I think I've made a mistake." But what I realized as you're in trust in the room is a lot of people are venturing into coaching. And I do feel there are better coaches than me. The one thing that I feel was different was the ability based on my past to sell. So I was walking in with a pretty significant base. Our first year of coaching, we broke $500,000 in revenue. So I was walking in thinking that we're off
Wow.
to a good start. And it was really hard, Chris. Lots of bumps, but we got to that size in year one. But there was a difference between having a concept of wanting to coach. And an old friend of ours used to say there's more coaches coaching coaches than there are coaches doing great work. And I still stand by that today. If you look on your Instagram feed, there's more here's how you coach rather than people that are out there doing the work. No judgment. And just fact for the last decade of my life invested in the space. But on my side, I think that moment was just a gut check. And it's one of those things, are you going to go or are you not going to go? Are you going to be the best you can be and own your space? Or are you going to play in the space for a couple of years and go back to something else? And luckily enough, I got the motivation, not on my own, support for people around me and the coach that I was working with and found my little niche.
It's awesome. Who was your coach at the time?
Colin Collard. Somebody you may know.
Incredible human.
Life-changing.
Incredible human. Still quote that guy like 12 years later.
Yeah, I still, it's amazing. I don't know if anybody's I wouldn't say indirectly because we worked together, I think one-on-one for almost 5 years, but I don't think anybody had the want and the investment in me as a person to do the best that I could. Although I couldn't see it at times and I resisted his feedback, I don't know if I would have found the momentum in the direction I was going that I did. If you're a coach, you should have one. But working with Colin, it was really that push. I would have got there, but he helped me get there much quicker and clear a heck of a lot of noise, especially in the startup stage.
Let's talk a little bit more about coaches in general, because there's, again, I would agree. There's, I even this year or last year for myself, putting coaching in my in anything I did, I had this sort of icky feeling about it because I think a lot of people go, whoa, like you mentioned. How important or how much of a differentiator is it for you, or has it been for you, I should say, being a coach, but also having that incredible sales, entrepreneurial, running companies background? Like, does that validate you or separate you from some of the other, I'll say, coaches that are out there?
Yeah. And I think for a lot of us, whatever your entrepreneurial journey, whether it's a coach or the space that you own, it's what voice are we listening to? Is it the external voice talking to our target audience, or is it that internal voice? And I think the biggest thing for me, and because we've been friends a long time, I would think if you wrote 3 things on a piece of paper that gets in the way for Matt, it's Matt, right? It's what happens in between here, right? So, and that's something that I've continued. There's now a couple decades of work, and I'm just scratching the surface and getting out of my own way. So I think part of the side is, just like you said, putting coaching in the title. Like that's that internal dialogue of being completely clear and grounded on what we're doing, more so for me, what I'm doing. And when I felt unsure, I had to go back and reset. It says, are you clear? I found the simplicity, it can be very simple to coach and it can be very complicated. But I found for myself to be clear to articulate what I'm doing and support my client and support myself, the more simple it is. And then definitely like the side of having sales experience, having entrepreneurial experience, really, I think David Goggins is stuff that came out last year. He's like, if I'm not God, whether you like David Goggins or not, there's something beautiful inside that human story. But he's like, when I'm not running, when I'm not training, I'm not me. And, when I'm not involved in a business, in my own business, not only do I have a coaching business, I have another business. Like if I'm not an active entrepreneur, if I'm not an active leader with my own people, can I show up and support you? Absolutely. I feel in my experience, I'm a better version of myself when I am showing up with bringing my experience in, as well as my coaching kind of context in and overlaying the two, whether that be hospitality experience, leadership experience, entrepreneurial. There's obviously different layers to what we bring forward to our partners, to our clients.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate it. I heard a great, it was, I think Monday this week, Mike Brown, I'm in a group with Philip McKernan. He's got a group of about 20 people. And the comment he made was, he's in it's called Unbreakable Wealth. So he coaches on finance, but he said something that really stood out. He's like, that's my Trojan horse. So I bring people in that are interested in this, but once I get them in, I coach them on the stuff that, for him, what it really matters is, moving them in all areas in life and health, and more than just that thing that he's done. So in your case, hospitality, restaurants, how quickly or how often does it happen where someone comes in for this problem, but all of a sudden, with your talents and skills, you can dig down and like you're working on something totally different that is, having transformational change for those people, either those individuals or groups?
I think the individuals, and it really depends on how much resistance. So I feel my job initially as a coach is to find resistance or to create positive conflict, because I want to figure out what the real problem is. If somebody says I'm not profitable or I'm not as profitable as I would like to be, for all entrepreneurial business, who gives a shit? None of us are. So what's really happening? What's the behavior that's behind the profitability? Profitability is a result. So in order, I think I got to agitate a little bit to get to the problem. And one thing I surrender to, I'm not the coach for most people. I've turned down more work in the last 3 years and some big 6-figure contracts that really sexy, flying on planes, great feature clients, but it was more entertainment at the side rather than in-depth coaching. And there's value in that entertainment-based coaching. They want it. I'm going to take the client deeper, and I'm going to expose their people to where they're really at, where I might do more damage than good. Damage being a dramatic word again, but I want to work with people who want to do the work on themselves. And if they're not ready yet, it doesn't mean that they're right, I'm right, they're wrong. It just means there's somebody better for them on that path. From my side, it doesn't take long for someone to identify what they really need to work on when they choose to start working on that. I'm a perfect example. I know some of the stuff I should be working on myself for years and had some of the biggest breakthroughs last year. I remember my coach saying to me, he said, I've told you that at least 8 times. I said, you've never said that to me before.
I've never heard that.
And he said, you just chose to hear it for the first time. So I think it's all age and stage. And again, it's not my journey. I can't want more for them than they want for themselves. I can't push. I can push as a coach, but if they're not ready, we got to stay in that prickly space until they are.
So when someone does come in and you assume that, or let's say you've looked at it saying this seems like a big fit, but you realize that this person or this culture and organization are not willing to change, do you relatively quickly step away?
And I made my mistake. So I was lucky, and I don't know why it happened in the first couple of years, but some of these bigger customizable contracts came forward. And one of my mistakes was customizing every program for every partner. And whether you're selling coaching or anything else, I'm sure everybody can relate. If you're in the services business and you're customizing, you're not scalable, and you're definitely not sustainable. I was on a plane every single week. So I think it's just a little bit more lead time up front and say, what's the intention and outcome? Tony Robbins starts every single meeting that he has with every single person, a little bit of rapport building. What's the intention and outcome we want from our time together? If we can create clarity there, then we can put focus there. If we don't create clarity on the intention and outcome, it becomes about the coach. It becomes about the process. And then you're going to get the call, show me the one-pager. Where's your follow-up email to our last one-on-one session? It gets a little bit of noise. We're moving away from what we're really trying to accomplish and getting into the stuff and things.
So, working with a lot of leaders today, what do you feel people are either missing or the biggest opportunity? And I use this in like a generic leaders, whether that's, a manager, owner of a restaurant or the CEO of a large hospitality group. What are people missing or needing? And maybe that's 2 parts, Matt.
Yeah, I think there's one thing that I'll see, and say some of the larger hospitality brands, once I earn trust with the leader, we do start to talk about legacy. And I think legacies can be talked about at the end of your career. It's just legacy of this chapter of yourself as a leader of the organization. Because often what needs to happen for the organization to step forward, we've all read the books, but it gets real when you're one-on-one with somebody who says, my wife's going to leave me. I haven't been home this week. I've worked every single night and I've got to get to the hockey game with X supplier on the weekend, whichever it is. But when you're sitting with somebody and really saying to them, you have to let go. And that's the language that I'm using. But really what I'm trying to do is have the words from them saying, I have to let go. Telling's not selling. So I can't tell you the answer to the question. The goal as a coach is how do I get you to arrive at the reality that works for you? So one of the biggest things is that In order for most organizations, in my experience, the bottleneck often is the leader. And it's not due to passion, heart, care, and will. It's that their inability or want to let go at this stage, and usually for beautiful reasons. It can be looked at by their people that you're not letting go because you don't trust us, you don't believe in us, you need to look at everything. Often it's, I've failed so much, I want to protect you from failing yourself.
Yeah.
And I care about you so much, I don't want to see you go through those nights, weekends, fights at home. And it doesn't always have to be bad. Miss time at home in order to sacrifice for the business because I did it. So the first thing is making sure that we get the leader realigned as to where they best play inside the business. That's a journey. I've seen some people get there in 3-6 months. Been working with a client now since year one. They just restructured the company, and I pulled out a piece of paper that we wrote up 5 years ago. They just finally restructured it. I was with him on Saturday at the hockey game, strangely enough, and he just put out, and he's like, I did it, and he absolutely loves the team and loves what he's doing again. He's always in for the scrap and the fight, but he let go. And the next side is, how do you inspire? How do you create trust and safety for your people? So sorry if this is a bit ranty, but I did a 7-day course on trust and safety last year, and it blew my mind. We all understand
What was the course you took, if you don't mind?
It was Day with Destiny by Tony Robbins.
Amazing.
So, and we all understand trust. Trust, I need to trust you inside this relationship. But what happens when we don't have trust? The absolute human need to feel safe inside of a human-to-human relationship. Like it's so simple. I think the course was 60% women, 40% men. You learn a lot from a female's perspective in a really challenging lens about how unsafe certain situations are for them. But what I've realized is we've all just gone through the pandemic. There's still uncertain times. We've got Trudeau leaving, we've got Trump. I'm not a political person, but you got a lot of change and noise around us.
Just globally, where there's a lot of challenges.
So the side of my number one piece when I go and sit with someone is, how do I make them trust me? And then how do I create safety for them? And if you ask my kids, what's daddy's job? Daddy's job is to make you feel safe and keep you safe. Like, that's how rooted it is for me. Like, that there's so many layers to that for me without getting emotional. But if I can make the leader feel safe, whether it's an up and coming person who wants to step into their power, ask a question because they weren't properly trained, but they're scared shitless because they think if they do, someone's going to judge them. Or for a leader to show up and say, hey, what we planned for Q4 2024, I missed the mark. We made some progress, but I missed the mark. And I'm going to own that from up top. And we're just going to sit here today and we're going to reshape it together. We've all watched beautiful. These things happen in moments. If you watch them happen continuously, you'll see them. We've all had friends at business who just took off. I think it's just compound impact, like compound interest. It can happen quickly, but it needs a heck of a lot of consistency.
Yeah, it's incredible. Matt, you, again, just following, I love how you share not just what you're doing at work, but on a personal level. And you're someone that truly, truly understands leading with vulnerability. So talk about that, how do you bring that into your clients and the teams that you're working with, and how important that is today?
Yeah, I'll go back to where I got shook on this when I was at an EO event. I got to do a Dragon's Den-like presentation, or Shark Tank-like presentation, and the celebrity judge was Warren Rustin. And Warren Rustin's, he's worked in the Bush Seniors administration, played in the NBA, oil billionaire. And I present to 120 EO people. My knees are shaking in front of this podium at
no pressure.
Business. I don't know if you were there. My face probably went purple. Everybody says that was great. And Warren says, Matt, what do you think the number one problem with your business is? And I said, I don't know, the software. You said this once to me too, Chris. I still remember exactly where we were when it happened because it landed with me as well. But Warren said, do you think it could be you, kid? Warren's a little bit older, so I didn't, the kid comment was well justified. And I was like, I don't understand what you're saying. He's like, do you think it's you that's in the way of your business? And he pulled me aside afterwards, and this incredible experience, like such a connecting man. And he said, I did that because I care about you. But he said, you're either a leader inside of work and outside of work, or you're not a leader at all. And he said, I can see you coming. You're out of balance. I can see you running, and I can see your eyes darting in your presentation because you're so amped up. But I can tell by watching you that you're not balanced. And it took me a while to accept all the great things that I can do and embrace all my imperfections. And I realized when I started to tell my real story, and I'm still taking masks off today for cheesy cliche, but even coming on this podcast, Chris, I'll be wanting to impress you as much of your audience based on our friendship. So I had to sit here and take those masks off. I had to sit here for 15 minutes before I hit log in to say, hey, just show up. Chris doesn't need you to
Yeah.
impress him. But I think on the vulnerability based side was I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I haven't been my entire life. The way that I get more comfortable with myself is by sharing my story. And I share some pretty deep stuff that, I wouldn't share in context because it would be out of context for the audience here today. But I'm going to go out there and I'm going to share me and know that through all my challenge and mistakes and successes, the more work my work is my wound, as somebody once said. I'm sure you've heard that before.
Yeah.
The more that I share, the more that I embrace myself, the more that I embrace myself, the more connection is created and the more work that's done.
I love that, Matt. And I just, again, knowing you just paints so much to that picture. But I just think the more people in this world, just in general, leaders or not, that can realize like we are all dealing with trauma of some level. We are all in pain in some level. We all have a unique story. And I think this that the power and where this world's just going to get better is the more people can realize that's okay and that's part of the journey. And when you share something, it creates that safe spot for me to go, holy shit, Matt's normal. He's human. And then I can share and I can feel comfortable and we just get on the same level. So I think, I'm just a huge believer in that from a leadership standpoint, but it's one thing to say it, but you have to do it. And that's where the results come in.
Yeah, and I think the one thing, because often it was side of how do I share my experiences? And I do think part of that came from Brene Brown's work when she really, for all of us, shared vulnerability.
Yeah.
I would say my first year of coaching, I over leveraged vulnerability. I remember her next Dare to Lead came out after Daring Greatly, and she said, if you're out doing this work, be careful. Because if you're comfortable with it, you can overexpose people. And you want to, just like, I don't know if anybody sat through a therapy session and it's done and you're like, what do I do now? Like, I'm not ready for the call to end and the call's got to end. Coaching session, the keynote, whatever it is, has to end. So the key thing for me is not only that trauma side, but if I wasn't sharing all of me, I wasn't able to step into happiness and joy. Like one of my most embarrassing stories was about 5-6 years ago, a therapist asked me, I've had 2 therapists ask me similar questions with the same response. And it is funny, but they said, when's the last time you felt joy? The first therapist I looked at said, I don't understand the question. And she went, oh,
Wow.
shit. And she laughed out loud. And then she went, you're not kidding, are you? And at that point, got great kids, had a great relationship, great companies. Life is fluid and it changes, but I got nothing not to be full of joy about. But because of my programming, childhood up, I'm like, hey, I can see the hard, but there's 97% great here. And sure, there's been 3% shit that I wish I could never experience again in my life, but there's so much great. So by restricting, not sharing, I was preventing myself from seeing the smile on my face as much as trying to get rid of the frown.
How did you move through that and get to a spot where you could really experience joy?
Yeah, I think my kids helped out. So I had somebody say to me in a caring way, they said, you have a choice. When I was having kids, they said, you're driving so hard right now. And they were hard on me. And they said, you are going to take joy out of your kid's life. It wasn't joy. It was like, you're going to take playfulness out of your kid's life in the early stages because you're so rigid at the time. Like you're trying to prove to somebody else. You're trying to prove that you can do it. You're trying to prove, some kid in high school or teacher in high school or somebody told me I wouldn't graduate public school, all this stuff. And when I said to experience joy, I realized through some work and some reading that I'll do more for those kids than I'll do for myself. And many of those people close to me, I'll do more for them than at times I'll do for myself. And I just ended up looking at the moments. So what are those moments that you spend with your kids that just floor you over? And it can be 10 seconds, 5 seconds, an afternoon. And those are that allowed me to start to open up and express. Because how I grew up, I didn't feel safe. Expressing joy wasn't allowed. Doesn't that sound crazy to say out loud? Joy wasn't allowed.
And
nobody's
that's
fault.
the program you have. So why would you be any different unless someone, unless you really were aware of that. So I get it, man. That's
and it wasn't, and now it's just a time to look at, I can be, in order to move forward, I've got to kind of do some rewiring. I went through, Chris, I don't know if you remember this. We were at a session years ago. It's an EO session, and they said in order to move forward, it's like your iPhone, you need to update your operating system,
yeah.
not replace your. I don't remember who said that, but it's kind of, and I haven't thought of that in 10 years. But somebody I was working with called me and say, I watched something on Instagram and they told me if I want to be successful, I got to throw the old version of me out. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't believe in that. I think we carry ourselves with us, but at times we just need to update our software, our operating system, should we choose to. If some of you are ready for an update, some of you need to hold tight for a bit. Some of you need to go, maybe we need to do some work on what happened last year. It's all wherever you're at. But for myself, what I'm looking at is how do I constantly reset that operating system?
What are the things that you're doing on the daily or the weekly to make sure that, excuse me, that you're the best version of you? And it's probably some habits or behaviors that you built into your life.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is just practicing gratitude. So going through
How do you do
simple
that?
journaling. I just still use the 5-minute journal. It's something that I find allows me to start my morning looking at what's ahead. This morning was one of the first times I've woke up in a while, because you can probably tell I've been fighting a cold, so I'm backed up at work. So I woke up with anxiety for the first time this morning. And that old feeling came back to go, I used to wake up, I used to go to bed like this. I used to wake up in the middle of the night like this. I used to wake up in the
Feels familiar.
like, this is kind of gross, like get it off me. But on the side is just looking, how do I start my day with a simple process of practicing gratitude? And I think I've realized the last, although there were some hard times, the last few years, like divorce has been one of the hardest experiences of my life. No judgment to my incredible ex-wife. But the process that you go through and the separation and some of the hard, and you can choose, there's a great quote, you don't live your life, you live the life you focus on. So you don't live your life, you live the life you focus on. And I think practicing gratitude slows me down enough to just say, there's so much great stuff, lean into it. And it could be for me, it's as simple as that. Then lemon water. I know every morning I cut into a lemon, my day's starting. It's as I can see the knife going into the lemon every single day. Don't like the taste of lemon water.
Don't care, but I know it helps.
It's not like I'm a lemon guy. But I know every time I do that my day is starting off early and it's starting off right.
That's awesome. How about health habits, fitness, working out, moving your body?
Yeah, that's it. So it's been one of the inconsistent sides due to health issues the last year. But I know when I'm at the gym, and it's not trying to get a 6-pack, but I do struggle with, you'll even see on this call, anybody watching me, I'm an audible person, so I'll turn my head, my eyes will dart. That's my high functioning ADD. So when I'm at the gym, it's like meditation.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not about pushing.
And you're working in between here, right? It's not.
Yeah. I'll find that my thoughts though. Like when you used to play baseball, when you could see a pitch a bit better, I can slow down in a workout. The trainer might be yelling at me, but I can still, I'm getting done what I want to get done and setting my day. And that, like for most of us, you see the most successful people are physically fit and mentally fit, that they're working on them. We've heard this, their minds and their bodies.
Yeah.
And I think it could be
the body to the mind. Yeah, I mean, I can relate. I don't know the health issue you're facing, but dealing with it's not severe, but it's an autoimmune issue the last 15 months for me, and the gym is the thing that triggers me, making me not feel well. So it's been a real challenge because for the longest time that was the thing that I could probably in some ways in the past beat the shit out of myself and have more of that, not self-sabotage, but it was like the pain, I'll get this over with, go hard, get through it. But now it's been like just this joyful, as you said, things slow down and it's a rejuvenation for me. And it's not, it's not for the muscles I'm building that I don't have, but it's the work in between the ears that just clears the mind.
Yeah. I've got a new business partner that he's always so calm and peaceful, and he's incredibly fit. It's like he's, I don't know, not significantly older if he watches this. He's older enough.
Take that back.
We'll edit that out. You're all older than and not, but it's just that peace and the calm that he's got a routine that he sticks to. He's got a 20-minute push-up routine every day. He's got a diet that he sticks to. that really works not only just for his physical health, but it works for his whole body. And he's gone through some health concerns some of yours recently that really challenged him, but he was able to hold in his foundation. And I think for all of us, there's just whatever your goal, what are those simple things done consistently and relentlessly that are going to get us where we want to go? And I know now, I'm 44. Being successful in business will not bring me joy and make me happy. My most successful financial years are my least happiest years. And I've learned a lot from successes and failures. It'll be imperfect balance. I just want to be when I'm with you, I want to be present when I'm with my kids, my friends, my partners at work. If I can be present, that's all that matters.
Yeah, I love that. Just on the sort of habits and routines, I read something this week, and it was something like discipline is the best gift you can give yourself, right? So like taking the thinking out of it, like staying committed to the things that you say you're going to do just allows you to be the best version for everything else and everyone else around you.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think of like saying that committed side to that inner dialogue for me. It's so I'm not over committed to 100 different things now. One of the must-do things that I've got a list right now. I just shipped out my list for next week because I've got a couple different things on the go. So this is what matters most. There's going to be a whole bunch of shit come up next week. How do we stay focused on these 3 things that matter most? And all this stuff, I think right now, because we are in a podcast format, right? It's all surface level, but I hope you just take one piece of this and really challenge it. And I think my job as a coach is to find your resistance. If there's an audience here today, some of what I'm saying, people are going to say that I don't agree with him. It doesn't sound right. He doesn't look like he practices that. Doesn't even know what he's talking about. That's perfect. That's where I want to be. I want you to find your resistance for you. Because once I can find somebody that I'm working with resistance or my own, then I can get to work. If it's just easy and yes answers and let's keep moving forward, we're probably not, in my experience, pushing hard enough or creating the clarity enough of where we actually could go.
Yeah, digging deep enough. Okay, so you've probably got a crazy list of like these lessons learned and experienced over the years. Give me one of the most challenging ones in business and the one that you're most grateful for as well.
I think one of the most challenging, I think it's a pattern.
Or not in business. Like, take that out. What are some of the most challenging things that you've faced sort of that have helped build you and you find that gratitude in?
Yeah, so I think somebody summed it up. I'm a huge fan of Eric Thomas. I've had a chance, he's kind of I don't want to say the godfather.
You see him in the airport randomly?
I did just recently. Yeah, I did a presentation. I pulled the slides on my phone. I've had a chance to meet ET a few times.
I got you, brother. That's awesome.
Yeah, he never smiles. Like I swear, he's like, "Hey, you want to get a picture?" And every time he frowns when he takes a picture, and I think he does it just to make me look stupid. But
that's awesome.
But I think ET side. But one thing that really landed, I was really down, and I am somebody who struggles with anxiety and depression, and the depressive states weren't long. Anxiety was just functioning. Depression's it was like 3 years ago. It's like 2 weeks, the sun went up and the sun went down. That's so far against my personality. And I'm like, I don't know what the heck is going on here. But going through some stuff with ET and some of his programs, one thing he shared is that, are we prepared for hard? Are we prepared for the challenge? If you are and this is a core amount of the content we're going to be putting out. If you're between the age of 35 and 55, you are going to have incredibly challenging times ahead of you. They're going to be personal. I've lost both my parents. We've had miscarriage. We've lost the divorce. I moved back across the country and back. This is in the last 5 years, 6 years.
Yeah, man.
It's just, and it's like, oh, woe is me, not woe is me. It's just, it is the season of life and the transition of what I'm going through without judgment. So my side is, how do we prepare ourselves? And with my personality, I think one of the biggest challenges was me not understanding some of the difficult times that we're ahead. For my side, is not understanding how hard the loss of my father would be, but also how hard it is to be an executor for your father and try to protect his best wishes. Not trying to go into the weeds on that stuff, but those that have been through it can relate. And so I think on that side, what I'm really wanting to work with younger leaders and leaders in their 60s, 70s going into retirement are really in that hardcore, how are we preparing for the hard times? Because the more we prepare for them, the more we're able to work through them, knowing that it's not if they come, it's when they come. And I think that reality, I didn't have that mindset things were great until they weren't. And when they weren't, I couldn't compute fast enough to get through it. And it cut me down for a bit. I wasn't knocked out, but I'd say I was probably operating at 80% capacity. And that 100% work was getting 100%, which meant that my kids were getting some and that I was really, really empty. I don't know if anybody's burnt out since the pandemic, but I was really, really empty. So kind of learning that was such a beautiful lesson. It just because I've been through hard times doesn't mean that more hard times are coming. Doesn't mean that they're not going to be hard. I will be significantly more prepared. It'll take a lot more for life to knock me back on my heels than it did over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And not that I want to take every day looking for trouble, but I know that it's going to come, and I will grieve whatever the process is. We could lose a pet. You got to grieve losing the pet. Take the time to grieve and move through. But I will no longer be put back for situations that I'm not anticipating. So I think there's a whole lot of heartbreak in that as we all go through. But there's so much. You can probably hear my tone change. I can breathe. It's not like before. I'd be breathing like this with less rolls in my chin, but breathing like this. But on that side, it's just like, hey, this is life.
And
the journey of
you
life.
See the beauty in it, right?
And the biggest thing we learn is there's not one person that I'm coaching or one person that's coaching me in a silo. I can't coach work you. I can't coach parent you. I can't coach, I want to run a marathon you. We need to coach all of you. It is connected. And I want to celebrate that. I want to celebrate the person. I want to celebrate the team. I was in a couple sessions I walked into a meeting last week and I said, congratulations on your engagement. And the whole room went quiet. And I went, oh shit. I said, am I the only one that knows this? Because I don't work here. So if I don't work here and I haven't been here in 3 months, and we changed we had a 6-hour workshop. And it's not they didn't like each other. They were just seeing themselves in silos. And we scrapped the whole agenda for the day. It was a pretty important agenda for some seasonal stuff they have coming up in the spring. And we just got to know each other better. Are people more likely to stay where they feel seen, valued, and heard? Or are they going to stay someone who's going to produce the best bottom line? I hope it's a combination of both.
It's incredible work. And just to I think what makes a great coach and you a great coach is just to go in and read the room, understand where people are at and go, hey, this thing I came with and or you guys needed or we wanted, it's done. And we're going to move through what is most important right now.
Yeah. One of the stories, I got hired to do a keynote talk for the Culinary Federation in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which I've never been.
Nice.
But it was beautiful. It was in the summer. So there's almost 250, 300 chefs. And I do an opening talk the one day, and day 2, we're going to do a talk. And I walk in and the room is, and there's an older demographic there. The organizer called, they're moving through older white male. So there are a lot of big celebrity chefs for our country staring at me, looking, who the heck is this guy? So I go to the organizer. I said, do you trust me? She said, I do. What are you up to? I said, do you trust me for tomorrow's session?
Yes, but why do you ask?
It was a 9:30 a.m. mental wellness conversation, which I'm like, are any of these older white men going to show up to a mental wellness talk at 9:30 in the morning? And I went out and I found an energy healer from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And my team actually did, because we were doing sessions all day, and they found her and I talked to her that night. And I said, can you come for an hour tomorrow? So I paid for her to come for an hour tomorrow. Awesome. And she stood at the front of the stage. We did square breathing. She just did some deeper meditation work. Wasn't much. I think she was with us for an hour. I think she stayed for the day, but she was hired for an hour and she did about 20 minutes to kick us off. I can tell you the unleash, like how many in the chef world, how many chefs lost friends during the pandemic. Suicide's a really high rate in kitchens, let alone during the pandemic. But the unleash of energy. So sometimes as a coach, if we step over the real problem, the energy, the situation where the person's at, and step over and try to provide the process and the solution, we miss the equation. You could have the best answer, the best solution, the best experience share. But if we don't sit and stay in that uncomfortable environment of what's really happening, not longer than we need to, but as long as we should, we miss it. And though they wouldn't have trusted me to have a mental health talk, like the organizers were running for tissue paper. It was just, but it wasn't a negative thing. It just, people felt comfortable and safe. And that'll be one of the, I really thank Culinary Federation for allowing me to do that, because they could have easily turned me down. But it's still a foundation of how they shape their talks today.
Wow. It obviously
Cool
went
stuff.
really well. That's
Yeah.
awesome, man. I've got the absolute pleasure. I'm speaking to a leadership group next weekend at Brock, 150 students, and as I'm sort of piecing together the final points of the presentation, I mean, it's again, okay, what are we going to talk about leadership? What are the things of my story that have been most helpful? And vision and creating a vision and like having that ties to goals. To me, that was one of the most like foundational things that I learned early on in the Dale Carnegie course. And like this was foreign to me at 21 years old. It's like, okay, create your perfect day in 6 to 12 months. I'm like, what do you mean? Like what do you, huh? And just that opportunity and someone showing me that there's possibility to create what you want. I mean, that has transformed my life from that moment on, 21 years later. And it's what I coach on and it's what I want to talk about. But how important is that of having that like crystal clear, big vision and goals for organizations and for individuals in their lives?
I think that the side that you shared there first is we've all had a foundation, whether it's Carnegie, whether my first book that I ever read was Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. So
Incredible
just
piece.
you
Yeah.
look back as success leaves clues. Like I really feel most coaching work out there right now is based off, a lot of it is based off Patrick Lencioni's work. And Five Dysfunctions of a Team, or one of the best books I think any leader could ever read, is The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. I still don't even know if I'm saying his name right 20 years later, his last name.
Yeah, I think you're good.
I just think it's simple side, but I think it's the understanding of goal setting. And I don't think that there's a perfect way. Because what I've watched, as I think 2 or 3 years ago, I called some of our peers in the coaching space and said, does anybody else hate doing annual planning with their clients? Just being honest. I'm like, I love everything I do with them, but there's about 6 weeks of the year where I want to stab myself in the eyeball, because we just get so stuck. And then the gentleman's name's Anthony DeMarco said, can we step back from this a bit? So why do you think that is? I said the accountability standpoint of, if we supply resistance where we don't understand the goal, then we're not committed to the goal. It's pretty simple stuff. But I think the one thing with goal setting is there's multiple ways to do it. I don't think a coach should be using 100, but I do have 3 or 4 that I go to depending on the complexity or how simple we want to make the process. All that I care about is, are we fully aligned and in agreement? Because here's the biggest failure I see on goal setting, is that we define goals in a strategy session. The goals are clear and we look at them and we co-create them. But when we go to leave the room, there's somebody sitting in that room saying, I understand what we're supposed to achieve, but don't they know that my department's 20% short? They know that my partner's sick and I got to be out of the office. So I know the company goal, but I don't know how I'm going to contribute to that goal. The biggest piece for me is goal. Here's our outcomes. Here's what we're going to do as leaders. Are we in absolute agreement as who will do what by when? This sounds simple. We all have heard this language, but I have watched dozens and dozens of meetings where great teams leave and I can see their divide, not by their words. I study body language. When somebody says, what do you do? I study body language for a living now. You will tell me if you're in or out by your body language in a strategy session or in a keynote talk. I could pick you out from the room if you don't want me to talk to you. I usually won't pick on you unless you're sleeping. But have some fun. But what I want to make sure is, can we slow down enough to say, are we in agreement? When we say yes to this, what else are we saying no to? These simple things. And these are
Why is this
all
not going to work?
These that we talked about, Sarah, all the books. This has been proven, since Stephen Covey and Napoleon Dave Carnegie. But how do we make sure that people are committed? And then how do we measure progress, not the end result? So one thing that I studied behavioral change during the pandemic. And one thing that I was told, backed up in neuroscience, I'm not that smart, but we cannot sustainably change somebody's behavior by giving them shit for what they're not doing. So you can't say you're not going to the gym, go to the gym, go to the gym, go. You'll go for a while, but at a certain point it's going to hurt and say, I don't want to do this anymore. So what we've done is building a recognition-based culture. Sounds like big words. Every single time we have the opportunity to recognize somebody for performance in the direction of their goals, how do we do that? And it doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be money, can be public, can be private. You have to figure out that strategy, and we've got a one pager that can help you put it to one page if you'd like it. But my belief is for goals, we need to recognize behaviors as close to them happening in the direction of your goals, because we can't give people shit for what they're not doing in today's day and age.
Yeah. And I got a ton of great notes just for myself. I mean, aligned and agreed. I think that's so powerful. And like, yeah, we talk a lot about everyone having a different currency. And I think just that stands true in every organization. But, that recognition piece, I think a lot of leaders, myself included, can easily step over and miss. And it's not about always the dollars. It's how do we recognize through whatever that lands the most with them.
And I think you shared, you're working with Philip still. There's a person where, like, when I look at how Phil is probably one of the most talented coaches on the planet, like on the
He's
planet
incredible
for what he does. But one thing that, like, I haven't seen that man in 8 years, because he could see me when I didn't want to be seen. Then he could provide the solution around me. But I really did feel that person that he understood me. I remember he said, "I'm going to get up and walk into your life in 48 hours. Whether you change or not, that's on you." He pushed accountability back to me instantly in the first 5 minutes. I wish I could take away the 6 hours I met him the night before, but that's a whole other story.
You and me both, buddy.
But I think there's a dynamic there. If you look at different coaches coming in and saying, here's what you need to do, to somebody who has the ability to see you for where you're at, as I call it, age and stage. And one of the great questions, what does support for me look like for you? But once I understand that position, and I can really see the person, then we could start to make recommendations. But I don't know why that just flashed in to bring up Philip, but I just think that person could see through your soul, which is why he's been able to impact so many athletes, entrepreneurs, and leaders across the world in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I see it in the work you do as well. And I mean, one thing I want to ask you is when you connect with someone early on in that relationship, and I find, and I see it in myself and people I coach, you can see a possibility that perhaps they can't see. How quickly do you share that with someone, either for inspiration, or maybe you don't, just because it could put them off or scare them? Or
yeah, I think it depends on. It's a great question, right? So when you see the talent in somebody, when do you share it? And I think that's. I got really humbled. Like it's even something for myself. I got to go to an event last year with some pretty high profile, some of the top restaurant operators in the US. And 3 of them pulled me aside after and said, "Hey, you've got something here. You just need to lean into it." And at that stage, I didn't know what they're going to do. The one guy grabbed me. It's about like 3,000 restaurants in the US, one of the biggest brands, owners, going public soon, incredible gentleman. But he said it from such a caring place. I'm like, how could I hear him and I can't hear people close to me? And so I think I learned a lot from the lesson, and I thank Greg often, although he doesn't like when I thank him. But and Dr. Emily Knight, just because they created the space for me to hear them. So I think the biggest thing is when you choose to share that you see somebody else's powers, are you doing it in an environment where they can hear it? And I think that's, as a coach, right? We need to study our personality types. We need to understand how they want feedback. We need to understand how they want to be challenged. Because a misplaced plug, hey, you're one of the most impressive leaders I've ever seen. If I've timed it wrong and I get the response, yes, but
they're not ready.
Could be better. And you have some leaders who are never going to change that. I've had a gentleman I work with said, that's your stuff. I'm not holding on to that anymore. It can always be better. I'm going to celebrate your wins whether you do or not. We actually planned a little, there's a quarterly win. So he showed up into his lunchroom and I was there with the quarterly win celebration and the pizza and all that stuff. He's like,
just
what are you
hated it, did he?
Yeah. He said, hey, if you're not going to celebrate, I am. But that's time
awesome.
with him not to throw me out of his office, which he was close that day. He didn't think it was funny.
Okay,
again,
so
nobody else saw, right? That nobody else knows I'm working backstage with him on not recognition of others, recognition of self.
Why do entrepreneurs struggle with that so much?
I think it's part of the fabric of how we're successfully wired, right? There is that want to always achieve more, do more. I like to the point that I won't be satisfied, but I do want to be joyful and happy. So I think before I wasn't satisfied and I wasn't joyful and I wasn't happy. So I want to continue to climb. I want to continue to fight. But I do consider the impact of all decisions I make in all areas of my life. Where before it was that business success determined my entire identity. Um, if I'm significantly out of shape and successful in business, great. If my kids, there was a lesson with, I remember having a conversation with a friend of ours, and they really pushed me to not miss it. So there's an opportunity to miss young kids growing up. And I won't share it now for confidentiality reasons, but I can't tell you how many times I thought about that. So I think that's scrappy
Yeah.
rewiring. A word that we have written in all of our values is scrappy. I'm not perfect. I'm not polished. I'm not putting on the fake suit anymore. I'm not, showing up in Air Force Ones who want to put me on stage in front of 12 people or 1,200. And I might put a
That's
sport
usually
coat
the
on if it's a
badass you
rush,
got to
right?
watch for, right? It's the guy in the t-shirt or the hoodie. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, what's his story?
Yeah. What's this? Yeah, it's not, and I'm not just, it's who I am and I'm on brand. Like it's not to put off your standards, but it's to show up and be in alignment with who I am.
Yeah, that's incredible. I appreciate you sharing that. I ask this every time just because I think there's so much advice that comes out of it for not for me, but for people that are listening and for me, I'll say. Um, Go back 10 years, 30 to 35-year-old Matt. What's the one thing you would sit down and leave him with?
The biggest thing is to make sure I spent my whole life trying to make others happy. There's a lot of rooted reasons in that. Where if I just concentrated more on my own happiness, I would have brought more positive, sustainable energy. And energy doesn't need to be forced, just energy into all that I did. So if I could just slow down and give myself a hug and say, hold on, like it'll happen. Um, and just to breathe, like just, it sounds silly. But I think we've all seen, the holidays is just passed. I'm sure there's a couple holiday parties you're at where, the entrepreneur comes flying in the door at midnight because they had to work. And I don't have any judgment. That's exactly what they should be doing for their stage. I had that happen with a friend this year. But that was me for a decade. Maybe not around the holidays, but definitely around Friday, Saturday nights. And just be generous. But Bernie Brown, how do you be generous with yourself a little bit longer?
Yeah, it's the excuse me, the analogy of like putting yourself first, which could seem selfish in one lens, but it actually allows you to be the best version of you for your family, your kids, your partner, your business, and everything. And it's a hard concept. I mean, this took me. I'm still going through learning and growth of this, but it took me a lot of years to realize that. And I think very similar. It's like it's okay to slow down. You don't need to beat the shit out of yourself to be successful.
Yeah. That's even like what's happening right now. Like the kids were sick. I was sick. I think if you live in Ontario right now, there's these colds going through and before I'd be hard on myself, right? You got to work late tonight. You got to, don't go to the gym. You got to catch up on those emails. And, I realized through stuff I saw from Cameron Harold did this years ago, but he said my email response, I put out my email responses 4 days. If you need me, you got my cell number, call me. Like it's not an email. It's not going to make or break me recovering from being legitimately sick for the first time, but I could work myself away for the next few days and end up being, burnt out on the weekend again. I think from now, like the biggest, and we haven't had this type of context conversation for a while, Chris, but just the difference in holding energy and then just letting it. I'm not that woo-woo coach, but I think it's just easier just to let it, things can be a lot easier than we make them when we choose to make them easier.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. What do you, when you think about legacy or, down the line, what do you want to be remembered for?
Yeah, for me, it's really simple. I want to remember it for being a great dad. I've got a lot of rewiring to do in relationships and what happened with my divorce and that's a great learning experience that I'll grow from. But the one thing that I
Yeah,
want to be remembered for, and I can see how simple it is. Like my kids even now, they don't want me all the time. Like my little guy wants to watch Paw Patrol for a bit. He doesn't want me sitting trying to, play a puzzle with him. But what I want to do is be present and be the best version of me that I was able to be at the time. Be imperfect, mess it up. But I want my kids to want to spend time with me as I get older.
man, I love that.
Sounds simple, but that's the goal.
That, yeah, I appreciate it, man. The last question, and then I have a couple words after, but is how do we find you and your work? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
So you can go to mattrolfe.com. So you see the name in the podcast title for our website, learn a little bit more about me. If you want to support me on LinkedIn, we put out a piece of content on average one per day. We will space it out, but we're putting out video content in different capacities based around the conversations I'm hearing with my clients. So it's not me drafting up content or creating a year's worth of content in January for the year. We really are fluid to what we're hearing in the market and trying to put simple ahas or hacks out to the market. And through LinkedIn, I always say this, again, it's amazing who calls. I'm not looking to sell you anything. If somebody just feels if something landed here and wants to have a conversation, this is what I do. One of my goals, one of my weaknesses that I'm working on last year and this year is the perception is that how busy I am. I want to be strangely accessible in 2025. I want somebody to be able to reach out. And it's not my turn. I wish it was. It's Ryan Reynolds' term. Ryan Reynolds, if you want to get a meeting with Ryan Reynolds right now, you can get a meeting with Ryan Reynolds. I found that out. A friend of mine who met him last week.
That's awesome.
But my goal is to be strangely accessible to support those who need it, and the right work will come in the right time. But if I can help you in any way, I will. Reach out through LinkedIn, and any support there means the world to me.
Buddy, I can't thank you enough. It was so good. Just so many of the stories and conversations that the time we had today threw me back. And again, just the experience and time you and I got to spend together. I'll forever cherish that. And I'm honored to call you a friend, to get to consume and absorb the content that you are putting out to the world and just how you're helping people. And I think you're a very selfless individual. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're all perfectly imperfect, but you're working on yourself just like you're telling your clients to do. So, man, I really appreciate the time today. And I got a ton of notes for me. I know the listeners will have a ton of value as well. So I really appreciate it.
And that's why I say thank you. Like this takes way more work. I know from the back end from doing to podcast work on our own, and it takes way more work. And just for you to be serving the audience and entrepreneurs, coaches, thought leaders out there, better leaders to better themselves. I appreciate it, brother. Your content's amazing, and I'm very, very grateful to be a guest on your show.
Oh, man. I love it. Well, thanks again. Appreciate it. We'll chat soon, buddy.
Thank you.